Good morning, everybody. This is really, really beautiful. We usually don't do these types of last minute classes. But by last week's Tanya class, we were learning chapter 15 of Tanya. And chapter 15 of Tanya is a beautiful, beautiful book. It's a beautiful chapter that speaks about the success of a Jew is when you are putting an effort to grow. That is a successful Jew. It's not about how much you do or how little you do. It's that we're always trying to push ourselves out of our comfort zone, to grow, to do something more. And Shelley Schindler challenged me on the spot, and she says that she wants to do something. And something that really excites her is Pirkei Avot. And she says, can you help me? I wanna take on something new. And I hate ever being the person to say no, unless I really, really need to say no. But I usually don't like saying no. So I said, yeah, let's do it. We'll do Pirkei Avot. So somewhat last minute and somewhat unplanned, I'm like, I got to check my calendar. When could I, at least 6 weeks, cram in, make a time. So, all right, Fridays at 11 a.m. for 45 minutes. So we put it out, and thank God all of you wonderful people are interested as well. And look at this. We have such a beautiful crew here. So this is going to be the plan. Let me tell you, I want to tell you a little bit about Pirkei Avot before I tell you what we're going to be doing in these 6 classes. And just by the way, the 6 classes is only the initial, the initial cycle. If there's still interest, we could continue after those 6 weeks. But we'll at least begin with 6 weeks because at least we need some type of quantifiable, start and end date to work with. So what is Pirkei Avot? Let's begin with that. Many know of it as the ethics of our fathers, or literally Pirkei Avot means the chapters of our fathers. Chapters. So the way it works is like this. About 3,300 years ago, right, 3,300 some odd years, the Jewish people received the Torah on Mount Sinai. The Torah is the 5 books of Moses, what we know as scripture. But then there was anything else that is part of Judaism that is not written down clearly in the Torah was taught by Moses to the Jewish people as what we call the oral tradition. And this is true about every single part of Torah. There's not a single mitzvah, not even one mitzvah in the Torah, that you could read the literal text, verse, and understand what that mitzvah is. Every mitzvah forces you as a reader to need more information. And that's called the oral tradition. About 1,300 years after the Torah was originally given was when the very first Jewish text was ever written. And that is what we call the Mishnah. The Mishnah was authored about the year, approximately about 100 of the year 100 of the Common Era, approximately. It was a many-year process to draft and finalize and ratify the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is the very first record of the oral tradition of the Jewish people that dates back from Moses. So this is literally the very original text. Today in the Torah library, in the library of traditional Judaism, there are well over 100,000 volumes. And probably a lot more if we're talking about more lesser known volumes. I would say just, if you want to build a Jewish library, literally the sky's the limit. There's no end. But the very original text, like the OG of Torah learning, is the Mishnah. It was written by one of the greatest sages ever alive. His name is Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, who is affectionately referred to as Rebbe, or the Holy Rebbe, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, our Holy Rebbe. And he was the one who made that fateful decision with his fellow sages of the time to record for the very first time in history the oral traditions from Moses and put it down, ink to paper, pen to paper. There are 60 tractates in the Mishnah, 60 specific sections. So for example, Shabbos is one tractate. Marriage, Kiddushin, is a tractate, etc. 60 general tractates of Jewish life covered in the Mishnah. Then there's one tractate, which is called Avot, the Fathers. And it is the only tractate that differs from the rest of the tractates in that all of the tractates are halachic. They are the legal requirements. They are simply telling you what you need to do as a Jew. Do this, don't do that, etc. If this happens, then you do this. They're all very, very down to earth. There's no philosophy. There are no real ideas in the Mishnah. It is simply, the Mishnah is a very, very concise, extremely concise, very even shorthanded, at times cryptic record of Jewish law. But the Ethics of Our Fathers is the one tractate where Rabbi Judah the Prince, felt the need to, for the very first time, record the Jewish traditional ethics. What are Jewish values? And it's really beautiful. There's many dozens of sages who were contributors to the Ethics of Our Fathers, spanning about 400 years, from approximately 200 before the Common Era to 200 into the Common Era. 400 years, dozens of sages, and each of these sages give us the Jewish values that they received from their teachers, going back all the way to Moses. And very often, the sages shared the values that they most connected with. What was the values that was the driving force behind their lives? And in this way, we have, dozens and dozens and dozens. I should probably count. I don't know. It's probably a few hundred specific ethical and moral teachings in the Ethics of Our Fathers. That this is the basis of the Jewish way of life. And what we're learning here is not so much law. It is character traits. It's attitudes. Ethics of Our Fathers goes much deeper than just what to do. It is trying to get down into the inner life of a Jew. How do you think? How do you live? What are the attitudes that live in your heart and soul when it comes to all of our relationships? Our relationship with God, relationship with our fellow Jew, our relationship with the world around us, our relationship with our Judaism. So it's the OG, it's the original text of Jewish values, such a beautiful text. And it is not a simple text. I just want to mention that. The Ethics of Our Fathers, you could read it quickly, but there is so much depth in every single statement, which is true to the style of the Mishnah. It was written extremely shorthanded. It was written in the style that few words should contain tremendous volume. And for that reason, the study of the Ethics of Our Fathers never ends. You have to always keep on studying and trying to flush it out and pull out more depth of what's happening over here. And therefore, what we are going to do for the next 6 weeks is, I want to choose one Mishnah each week, just one Mishnah, one specific teaching, and spend about 40 or 45 minutes to study, unpack, and try to really get down to the bottom of all the details of this Mishnah, what it's really teaching us here, based on the teachings of all the commentaries, based on the teachings of the Talmud. And you're going to see that in action, God willing, today, where we take one little statement, which we could, spend 5 minutes on, and that's it. But no, we want to really try to get down to the bottom of it and see the beauty and see the understanding and see the uniqueness of it. Now, one more point before we jump in, which is right now that we are learning the Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of Our Fathers, is a very opportune time. It's a very apropos, because Jewish tradition, there's a Jewish custom to learn the Ethics of Our Fathers in the summer months, in the summer weeks. There are many reasons for that. It begins after Passover. So from the Shabbos after Passover until Rosh Hashanah, every week, specifically on Shabbos, which is beginning tonight, of course, we study the Pirkei Avot one chapter at a time. The reason for this is, well, the simplistic reason is that Shabbos in the summer is much longer. Like here in Detroit, Shabbos ends these weeks 10 o'clock at night, you know what I'm saying? It's not like the winter, we're already by 5:30, you're ready to hit the town at 6 o'clock on a Saturday night. In the summer months, it's a long Shabbos. It's a long Shabbos. It's a good time to study, put in an extra study regimen for the summer months. That's a very simplistic reason, but there's also a deeper reason. The summer weeks, the summer months, has always been a time where people focus on physical recreation, right? We're always focusing on, let's go give ourselves a good time. We focus very much on our physical lives, which is good. It's a good time for it. And for that reason, it's also a time where the sages instituted, we can't forget about our souls as well. We're putting extra emphasis on our physical recreation, time to invest also into our spiritual recreation, our spiritual growth. So for that reason, the beloved Jewish tradition to learn the Pirkei Avot here in the summer months. So it seems like mid-June is a great time to begin. And this week, tonight and tomorrow, the chapter for this week is chapter 1. So there's only 6 chapters in the Ethics of Our Fathers. So we just go through cycles of them, right? We just do it on repeat. As soon as we finish chapter 6, next week, back to chapter 1. So we are beginning a new cycle this week. So it's a perfect time to start learning. So I want to encourage all of you that you should, if you own a book of Pirkei Avot, or if you don't own it, I actually want to encourage you. I'm going to email all of you a link to buy yourselves a book of Pirkei Avot. And there's many, many great books in English. Spend time on Shabbos and learn a chapter of Pirkei Avot. And you could either read it, if you read it just without doing any extra study, it'll take you 10 minutes. And then you could buy books with extra commentary. You could spend an hour, you could spend 2 hours, you could spend 10 hours on one chapter of Pirkei Avot. And I mean that quite literally. I own a set in my house, one full book on every single chapter of Pirkei Avot. So a very slim, Pirkei Avot is really not long, I'm saying. If you just, a translated edition of it should be 15 pages, 20 pages. It's really not that long. But with all the commentaries, it's a world in and of itself. So dear friends, let us jump in without any further ado. Chapter 1 of Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of Our Fathers. Just one more thought. Such a beautiful thought. It's called the Ethics of Our Fathers. What does it mean, Ethics of Our Fathers? Who are the fathers? The sages of Israel, usually they are rabbis, usually they are leaders, but in this book they assume the role of fathers, which is so beautiful, no? That these sages are teaching the Jewish people how to act the same way a father will guide their child, right? This is already a very different type of relationship than any other book of Judaism. If you study Talmud, you're studying from the sages as they are rabbis. And over here, we're studying from them as they are our fathers. So this is very fatherly love, fatherly guidance, and there's a certain form of direction that is inappropriate for anybody else to give to anybody other than a father. Only a parent could say such things. Only a parent could sometimes be so blunt, so honest, so real with the guidance and the education of their child. So this is really the time when we approach Judaism as a child and say, and we open ourselves up for the guidance and for the direction of life. So dear friends, let us begin. This week is chapter 1, and we are going to study the 6th Mishnah, the 6th paragraph in the Ethics of Our Fathers. And I sent you a handout this morning. Each morning I'll send you a handout. In that handout is the Mishnah and a few additional quotes from the Talmud that will help demonstrate or flesh out certain ideas in that Mishnah. So let us begin. Let's read today's Mishnah. Text 1, which is on page 2 of your handouts. Avot, chapter 1, Mishnah 6. And here we go. Rabbi Yehoshua, the son of Pirkei, would say, make a teacher for yourself, acquire a friend for yourself, and judge every person to the side of merit. That's the Mishnah. Now I just want to give you a moment, a moment of silence. And I just want to make sure we register every single word over here. 3 clauses, 3 teachings. Make a teacher for yourself, acquire a friend for yourself, and judge every person to the side of merit. And as I'm going to show you, the the precision of the words, word choice, the phraseology. Everything is very precise over here, and we're gonna jump into that. And Marshall's saying a great thing. We're coming up to Father's Day, so for Father's Day we begin learning ethics of our fathers. That's great, Marshall. I love that. Okay. So number one, this Mishnah is a great Mishnah to begin because this is the Mishnah that teaches us the totality. It encompasses all of our relationships. You know, in all the relationships we have, there's generally, you could split everybody in this world, everybody that we know of, goes into one of three categories. There are the people that we look up to. There are the people that we feel are our peers. There are people that we're on the same level, we could be friends. And then there are people that we look down to. Yeah, people that we look at them and we don't appreciate them, we don't approve of who they are, what they do. So generally, that's everybody in our lives. Either you look up, right? So either you look above, upward, or you look at them equally, laterally, or you look at them downward. So this Mishnah teaches us, on all those levels, what the proper relationship is. Let us explore one at a time. The first one is, make a teacher for yourself. In the Hebrew is three short words, aseh lecha rav. Make a teacher for yourself. Okay, the simple meaning is that every single Jew must go find for themselves a teacher that will teach them Torah. On the very basic idea, every Jew has a mitzvah, the obligation to study Torah. Go get for yourself a teacher. If you don't have a teacher, go find a teacher. That is on the baseline. The most elementary meaning is that. But then there's even a little bit of a deeper one. Make for yourself a teacher. The Hebrew word is rav, which by the way is the very original source of the word rabbi. Rav, rab, rabbi. That's where it comes from. Make for yourself a rav. Make for yourself a rabbi. It doesn't only mean somebody who will teach you Torah. It also means, very critically, a mentor. Make for yourself somebody, a spiritual authority in your life, who you will be able to speak with, confer with, and get guidance for the decisions in your life. So it's not just about studying Torah, it's that every single Jew needs somebody who is their mentor. You know, in the recovery community, there's something called, you can't enter the 12-step program without a sponsor. You need to have a sponsor. And a sponsor is also the person that you keep on going back to whenever you're having difficulty or a question or a problem. So, to use recovery language, go find a sponsor. Go find that person who's going to be your personal mentor. And this is, again, beyond Torah study per se. This is about life in general. Now, the obvious question is, why is this so necessary? Why is it so necessary? For studying Torah, do you really need a rabbi to teach you Torah? There are a lot of great books out there. There's so much Torah in English. You could buy books. You could go even find it for free online. So you need a rabbi to teach you Torah. Why do you need a rabbi? And maybe even you could say, I could just watch rabbis on the internet. Why do I need a rabbi who I have a relationship with, who's my rabbi? I don't need that. I could just go online and find people. So why is there such a need? I could buy books. And the same thing with advice. Do we really need people? We're grown men and women. I need somebody who I need to speak over every single decision in my life. I can make my own decisions. But over here we see there's a critical Jewish value. Every Jew must make for themselves a rabbi and a mentor. So what is the reason for this? So there's two reasons. Number one, I think we all understand that books only give us data and knowledge. Books can give us a lot of information. But at the end of the day, in real life application needs a real teacher. Nobody could study medicine from books. You study medicine from a teacher, somebody who can show you, can demonstrate to you, who can teach you the nuances that are beyond what could ever be captured in a written book. And the same thing with Judaism. You could study, you can study, but at the end of the day, to understand how to apply it, how to live it, how does a Jew really live Judaism, that can only truly be taught by a teacher, who was taught by his teacher, who was taught by his teacher, going all the way back to Moses. So that's the very first idea. Books are only one component. At the end of the day, and in Judaism, it's a very big value, one must study from a living person. There's a tradition. Judaism is not just books, it's a living tradition, which means that we receive from somebody who received from the previous generation, etc., so forth. And that's number one. But most importantly, getting to the idea of having a personal mentor, Judaism says, we have to be conscious of a very big weakness we have when it comes to ourselves. You see, Judaism says every single person has something called self-love. Or it's called the self-bias. We're all extremely biased for ourselves. Right? We all have a self-bias. And what that self-bias does, that sometimes it clouds our better judgment. That bias clouds our sense of objectivity. And what that does is that sometimes we will make decisions that we ourselves don't even recognize is not the right choice. But because we are not objective, because we are so subjective, because we are so biased, that we're somewhat blinded. We're blinded by our self-interest. It's even like a form of bribery. We love ourselves so much that we're bribed, and we're forced to look at things from only from one perspective. How many times did maybe of a family member, we know of politicians, we know of celebrities throughout the ages who've done very stupid decisions. And they didn't even realize when they were doing it how stupid it is. But that was that self-bias that they had. And they acted in a way that was perhaps destructive to themselves. And everybody else could see it, but they couldn't see it. Their self-bias clouded their better judgment. And this is true, our sages say, about every single person. Doesn't matter how smart you are, how intelligent, how honest, how much integrity you have, how holy you are, how altruistic you are. At the end of the day, we do not have the capacity. No human has the capacity to think objectively, to see things objectively when it comes to our own personal lives. There's a law in Judaism that a relative cannot be a witness. It's interesting because secular law does not have this law. Judaism, there's a very big law in Judaism, in Jewish legalities. A relative cannot be a witness. A relative cannot be a judge. Why? Because you're biased. You're inherently biased. There's no way a relative is not biased. So you can't be a witness in this case. You can't be a judge. So if a relative can't be a judge for ourselves, how much more so we can't be a judge for ourselves, right? We're related to ourselves. No matter how biased a relative is towards us, we are the most biased towards ourselves. We see this about our children, right? Every single parent is unbelievably biased towards their child. My child could do no bad, right? Every single teacher and principal suffers from this. They get the kid in trouble, and then the parent says, "No, there's no way my kid did that." Yeah, it's a good thing, I guess, that parents love their children so much to the point that it clouds their better judgment. But this is the idea. You need a mentor because there is no possible way that you will be making the right decisions, sometimes tough decisions, if you are winging it by yourself. So Judaism mandates you must appoint for yourself a personal mentor. And when you are ever at a crossroads of life, big questions, small questions, you speak it over with him or her. I want to read this next text because the Talmud, this is a quote from the Talmud brings out this quote to speak about the power of bribery and how bribery totally blinds our sense of objectivity, our sense of justice. So let's read this next text. It's on page 2 from the Talmud. Here's a little story. A man once brought the gift of the first fleece to Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. Okay, let me explain to you. There are many gifts that are mandated in the Torah that a Jew must give to the Kohanim, to the priests. Because the Kohanim, any Kohanim here? Any Kohens here? All right, no Kohens here today. But the priests would dedicate their lives to the service of the Holy Temple, and therefore there's different forms of taxes to help support the families of the Kohanim. One of these taxes, the gifts that every Jew would bring to the Kohen, was called the first fleece, like the first wool that you would shear off from your sheep, or your right. So Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha was a Kohen. He was a great sage, and he was a Kohen. He was actually also a Kohen Gadol. He was a high priest at some point. Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. So this guy goes to Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha. Let's continue reading. Rabbi Yishmael asked him, was there no Kohen to whom to give it between where you came from and here? You traveled an hour to get to me. There's no Kohen in your vicinity? So the man replied, I have a legal issue with someone, so I thought that since I'll be seeing you in any case, I'll bring it to you. Oh, you see what's going on over here? He's bribing the rabbi. Rabbi Yishmael said to him, I am disqualified from hearing your case. Over. He right away removes himself from the case. He disqualifies himself. He also refused to accept the gift from him. So he says both. I'm not hearing your case and I'm not accepting your gift. I think this whole thing is inappropriate. Oh, but now the story continues. Rabbi Yishmael appointed two other rabbis to judge the case. As the person was presenting his arguments, Rabbi Yishmael found himself thinking, if he would argue this point this way and emphasize that point the other way, he would have a better case. So Rabbi Yishmael, in his mind, is already starting to play lawyer. Subsequently, Rabbi Yishmael said, see how corrupting a bribe is. I didn't even accept the gift from him. And even if I had, it would have been something to which I am entitled to by law. Nevertheless, I was inclined in this person's favor. How much more so one who accepts a bribe. You see, his mind was already biased towards this person simply because this person wanted to give him the gift. He didn't even accept it from him. And it wasn't like a nice bottle of wine, like a nice bottle of champagne. This was part of daily life in Judaism. You give your first fleece to a Kohen. Rabbi Yishmael teaches in the Talmud, bribery has an unbelievable power. It clouds your judgment immediately and in a very scary way. And our sages say we are essentially bribed against ourselves. Our ability of objective and proper judgment is totally lacking when it comes to ourselves. And it's fine. It's a good thing. We're meant to be that way, right? This is not a negative. It's just part of life. So the Talmud therefore says the ethics of our fathers tells us that when it comes to critical decisions in our life, decisions for ourselves, decision for our children, for our family, what to do, everything, just any decision. What's my next step in my spiritual growth? How should I deal with this situation? I'm dealing with a difficult time. How do I, what's my next step? You need to always have somebody else, somebody who you trust, somebody who cares about you, and somebody who you could respect and force yourself to accept their opinion. All right, this is somebody that, according to Jewish law, according to Jewish ethics, this isn't just going to get to hear somebody else's ideas. In some way, what that person tells us has to be binding. That's the only way it works. We have to make up with ourselves that when I ask my mentor what to do, his word goes, even if I don't like it. Because that's the way it works. A person needs a mentor to guide him. That's the way it works. We don't have the ability, our selfishness, our self-interest, our self-bias clouds our own judgment. And this is something even the most knowledgeable person, even the wise person, even a great, great scholar needs somebody else who they go to, and that is their personal mentor. And the key is also you have to have only one mentor. If you have 20 mentors, that doesn't help. Because you start shopping around for the advice that you like. That's also not good. It has to be one person, so they're getting one objective opinion, and that's the way it works. This is a very, very difficult demand from the ethics of our fathers. But this is very, very critical. Very, very critical. That every Jew should have a personal mentor, especially for their spiritual growth. And that mentor should help them see things from a perspective that we are not able to see ourselves. But one more final note. Take a look again at the wording of the Mishnah, text 1. Make a teacher for yourself. Or in the Hebrew, it's asay lecha rav. Make for yourself. What does that mean, make for yourself? The word asay in Hebrew has the implication of even by force. Like there's a Hebrew term in the Talmud, me'asin al tzedakah. We force people to give charity. I don't think I would have too many friends if I would do that. But back in the day, when there was even a form of Jewish self-governance in Jewish towns and Jewish cities, there was the idea, if you didn't give charity, the town council would come and have a meeting with you and say, that's not okay. If you need to build a mikveh, if a community doesn't have a mikveh, they need a mikveh. You don't make a nice campaign and you say, we hope everybody could give some charity. You demand. You call everybody into a room, you say, we're not leaving here until we have the funds. We force people to give tzedakah for the charitable needs of a community. So when we say in this Mishnah, we'll talk about charity another week. I'm just using that to show you the similarity of the words. Asay lecha rav, me'asin al tzedakah. We force you. One has to force upon himself the idea of creating for themselves a mentor. This is not voluntary, and the commitment has to be to the level of even force. We have to force ourselves to have a mentor. We have to impose their authority upon ourselves. That even when we don't agree with them, and even when we resist their advice, we have to personally, by choice, impose upon ourselves what they tell us. All right, dear friends, let's continue going. The next clause of our Mishnah, acquire a friend for yourself. Most of us usually think as friendship as something which is passive, right? Which means friends is something that we simply pick up as we go through life. We go to school, we found this friend. We go to the same yoga class, so I found this friend. It's somewhat circumstantial, like by chance. And here we're seeing a very different type of model that Judaism teaches us. Every person must have friends. Everybody must have colleagues. Everybody must have companionship in the form of friends. And this is not a rabbi, somebody who we look up to, somebody who teaches us and mentors us. This has to be a peer, somebody who's on our level, somebody we trust, somebody who I could bare my soul to, and somebody who knows that we have strong enough of a relationship with that they could talk to me honestly and put me back in line. That's a real good friend. A good friend is somebody who's able to give you a call and say, I see that you're stepping out of line. I see you getting yourself in trouble. I'm your friend. I want to tell you this is not okay. That's a real friend. A real friend where there's vulnerability going both ways. That's real friendship, real companionship. And we see that the sages were very into this. The sages really valued friendship, and they had real deep friendships. And they invested in their friendships. It's a very powerful thing. Everybody needs a friend. Here's the powerful thing. How does the Mishnah word the value of friendship? It says, acquire for yourself a friend. Acquire a friend for yourself. The Hebrew word is uknei lecha chaver. Kinei. Kinei is from the word kinyan. Kinyan means a purchase. Purchase for yourself a friend. Acquire for yourself a friend. It doesn't mean go pay somebody to be your friend. But what it does mean is invest in it. This is an asset. This is a commodity. Friendships can't be passive. Friendships to be something we invest in. We sacrifice the time and even money for. Friendships are very important. Pursue them. Somebody told me like a year ago, someone told me that they lost all their friends over COVID. They feel it's been 2 years and why? Because all of her friends were somewhat circumstantial. Yeah, we happened to go play this together, but now I hadn't talked to them in 2 years. So I told her, you can't be passive about it. Go pursue those friendships again. They like you. You like them. So it happens to me you didn't talk in 2 years. Go pick up the phone. Say, we got to go out for coffee this week. Make it happen. Make those sacrifices. Make those investments. Invest real time and money into your friendships. And that's exactly what the sages are telling us over here. Acquire for yourself a friend. Sometimes it's going to cost. And that's the Jewish model. Make sure you have friends. There's no such thing as somebody who doesn't have a friend. And you know why? The way Judaism describes it, the way the Talmud describes it is like this. We all know this, basic physics. When two people are carrying a heavy load, if two men carrying, I don't know, a piece of furniture, two men doesn't add up to what each one could carry on their own. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. When two people are carrying a load, they are able to carry more than double of what each one could hold on their own. It's a very powerful idea. So let's say I could pick up on my own 100 pounds, and then someone else could pick up 100 pounds. When we come together, our load, our maximum is not 200 pounds now it's 300 pounds. When you do things together with a friend, your capabilities grow much larger than just the math. The math of friendship is very powerful. So our sages tell us, get for yourself a friend. Make sure you have companionship. Make sure you do things with other friends. Make sure when you're going through a challenge, you have a friend to go through the challenge with you. And your load, your potential, your capacity becomes somewhat superhuman. It's not just 1 + 1 = 2. The math of friendship is much more. 1 + 1 = 3, and maybe even more than that. And I don't want to read this whole text, but take a look at text 3, which is on page 4. The English begins on page 4, and just take a look at the last line. The last line. Said Rava, this is the meaning of what people say, either companionship or death. That's heavy. The Hebrew is, O chavruta, O mituta. We have the word chavruta, like a study partner. Either a friend or give me death, which means that has to be how much we invest in our friendships. It can't be passive. It's not something that just either happens or doesn't happen. We have to really invest, make those sacrifices for our friendships. It's vital for life. It's vital for spiritual life, for our practical, physical lives. And that's the second teaching from Rabbi Yehoshua. The final teaching, dear friends, is towards the people that we look down to. Right? We spoke about the people who we look up to, that we must find for ourselves a mentor, who we trust, who we respect, and that we will impose their guidance upon ourselves. Then we spoke about the people laterally, the people who are on our level, our friends. Go chase after those friendships. Go make those friendships. Go make it happen. And now we speak about those who we look down to. The final lesson. The people who we feel are inferior to ourselves. And what does the Mishnah tell us? The Mishnah tells us, judge every person to the side of merit. It's very interesting. The Mishnah doesn't say don't judge other people. The Mishnah says judge other people, but judge them favorably. Judge them to the side of merit. You know, non-judgmentalism is very cheap. You know what I don't judge you mean? When I say I don't judge you, what it also means is I don't care about you. It's like a certain form of apathy. Yeah, I don't care. I don't look. You can do whatever you want. I don't care. There's a certain coldness, it's a certain detachment from saying we don't judge anybody. Like, by the way, in Chabad, people say Chabad's very non-judgmentalism. It's not true. Non-judgmentalism is a very big form of apathy. It means I just don't care about you. I don't even care to think about you. Chabad is actually very different. Chabad is very judgmental, but in a very beautiful way. But we'll get to that in a moment. Let's speak about ourselves first. Every person must judge the other person to the side of merit. What this means is, how many times did it happen that somebody did something, whether somebody we know or somebody in the media, we heard about in the media, somebody does something, they behave a certain way, and we look at them in a negative light. We automatically assume their guilt. We assume their negativity. And then sometimes we could discover that there was one little detail we didn't know of, one little piece of circumstances. And it changes the whole scenario. And all of a sudden, like, wow, you know what? I was too quick to judge. That wasn't right of me. That wasn't actually what was happening over here. What the Mishnah says is, don't wait until you hear that one little detail that changes the story. Assume that from the get-go. So even when something happens and you're judging another person unfavorably, immediately do the mental exercise of saying, how can I find a possible way to find merit, not guilt, with what this person did? And I'll just tell you, this happened very recently. Somebody did something. A relative. It wasn't a relative, it was a friend. And I told Mushki about it. I'm like, I was very unimpressed with what this friend did. Okay, I assumed, and I was sure I was right. I saw exactly what happened. They did this. And all of a sudden, Mushki heard what the real story was. And Mushki sent me a voice note right after. She says, there's a real lesson we just can't judge. Because she also jumped on board with my interpretation, which was the straightforward interpretation. That's just how humans think of things. You see something, it sounds bad, it looks bad. It is bad, right? When there's smoke, there's fire. But it really wasn't the case. That's not what it was. And it really wasn't a problem. And, it always happens to us. But, the problem is that even when we find out, even when we discover that the person was really not guilty, he's innocent, we fall into the same trap again. Every day we can keep on going through the same trap. Every single day we see something, we judge. We're always quick to judge. We're always quick to not be biased and not find a good interpretation for what somebody did. So our sage is telling us right away we have to make that assumption. Judge people favorably. Assume that there's something that you're not aware of, which is why this thing happened, and explains it all. That is the importance of this teaching. And you could read it on your own. In text 4, there's a very beautiful story, and a little bit of an extreme story, that the Talmud uses to bring out the power and to what degree we have to have this quality of judging every person favorably. Dear friends, I want to conclude today's class with two more deeper analysis of this teaching. Judge every person to the side of merit. Number one, we see over here in this one Mishnah. I'll tell you two things, and I'll tell you a little story, which will help explain a little bit of historical context to this teaching. Number one, we see in this one Mishnah a double standard, which is usually we don't like double standards. Double standards means when we use one standard for one person and then we use another standard for other people. It's usually a sign of lack of integrity, a lack of intellectual honesty. In the news you have it a lot. This person's treated this way, the other person does the exact same thing, treated differently. But this Mishnah is promoting, is telling us we should have a double standard. The Mishnah is saying like this: we as humans don't treat other people the way we treat ourselves. We all know the bad things we did. And I can assure you, because I know about myself, that even though we know our negativity, we are still quick to say, but I'm still a good guy. That's not who I really am. I'm a great, great guy. Yeah, I know I did this or that, but I'm a good guy. So we're very quick to always bring out the goodness and bring out the merit within ourselves, bring out the innocence within ourselves. By other people, the way humans are naturally is the opposite. We're very quick to find their guilt. We're very quick to use one little detail and say, wow, that person, I'm so unimpressed. And all of a sudden, it colors our whole attitude, the whole way we approach that person. The Mishnah is saying we have to flip it. We have to flip it. The love, the self-love, the self-bias that we usually have to ourselves, we have to try to apply that to other people. And this is really touching the mitzvah to love your fellow as you love yourself. Love a fellow Jew to the point that you have a bias towards that Jew. That even when you hear something negative, you say, no, I still want to find a way, a possible way, to say, no, they're not guilty, they're innocent. Find some way to explain. Maybe there's a missing detail here, which explains why they did this. Find a way to bring out their innocence and not their guilt. So about ourselves, we have to try to be the opposite. One of the worst traps people fall into is rationalizing their bad choices, finding justifications, and finding excuses for the bad things that we do. So for ourselves, it's not healthy to have the self-bias. For ourselves, we have to own up. We have to be willing to fix the messes that we made, even when it's uncomfortable. But by other people, it's the opposite. By other people, we have to right away assume their goodness. We have to assume their justice. We have to assume that they're good people. It's very, very unhealthy. to focus on the negativity of other people. And the Jewish value is always try to cloud our own judgment towards other people. Always try to bring out the goodness. Always find some way to explain the goodness. But one more detail. One more detail. And this is a beautiful idea. Look at the word of the Mishnah. Judge every person to the side of merit. That's interesting. Very interesting choice of words. Somebody does something bad. So you could say, you know what, I can maybe find a way to rationalize their innocence, that they're not guilty. But the Mishnah doesn't say judge them not to the side of guilt. The Mishnah says judge them to the side of merit. Find something good about them. That's very extreme. It's not just saying, just say they're still a good guy. No, bring out goodness, even when you see something bad about them. Bring out a merit. Judge them to the side of merit. That's powerful. What does that even mean? So, in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, for those of you learning Tanya, we're going to learn this in chapter 30. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya says something so beautiful. He says, the Talmud teaches that the greater a person's potential is, that's also the potential for them to fall is. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, the greater a person you are, the greater Yetzer Hara you're given. So when you see somebody who did something pretty low, you know what you need to think as a Jew? If they have the ability, if they have the potential to fall so low, that also proves how high they could go. It shows you just how much merit they are capable of. It shows you how much goodness they really have within them, and it should inspire us to reach out and try to cultivate that goodness within them. If you see somebody who could sin worse than you could, you know what that means? That means they could be greater than you. You have to have a whole new respect for them. And as Jews, as a fellow Jew, we have to try to reach out to them with that love. I want to conclude with a quick story. Who teaches this teaching? Rabbi Yehoshua ben Prachia. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Prachia says that we should judge every person to the side of merit. You want to know why Rabbi Yehoshua ben Prachia taught this teaching? I'll tell you the story. Because Rabbi Yehoshua ben Prachia didn't do this to one of his students. And the results were pretty bad. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Prachia lived about 200 years before the Common Era, maybe a little bit later, 150 years before the Common Era. And it was a time of religious persecution. It was a time when all the sages were being persecuted in Israel. So he ran down south to Egypt with all of his students. And he was in an inn. They were traveling down by Egypt in the desert. They stayed by an inn one night, and one of his students pointed out about the innkeeper. The inn was ran by a couple, by a married couple, a husband and his wife. And one of his students mentioned that the wife is not good looking. All right. Boys will be boys. So he said that comment. That lady is not that great looking. Rabbi Yehoshua was very unimpressed by that. He says, what business do you have commenting, especially about married women? If it's a single woman, then maybe you're thinking, maybe I could marry her. So you're looking at her. So married, what? You're commenting about the physical appearance of a married woman? He told him off. This student was very hurt. So the student left. The student left his teacher. But then the student tried coming back. And Rabbi Yehoshua was tough on his student. To the point that his student said, you know what, I'm dropping Judaism. He turned to idolatrous ways. And he became an instigator. He instigated other Jews to also leave Judaism. And Rabbi Yehoshua felt very bad. He says, you know what, I didn't treat that student properly. I should have found merit with him. I shouldn't have turned him off. And look, now my bad choice is causing damage to the Jewish people. Do you know who the student was? According to many opinions, it was Jesus of Nazareth. It was Jesus himself, was Rabbi Yeshua's student. And it was because of Rabbi Yehoshua thought that as a teacher, his rebuke would help the student grow. And it was a bad judgment. The student was too, he got too offended and too hurt to the point that the student just totally left Judaism, left his studies. So Rabbi Yeshua says that's not the right way. From one Jew to another Jew, even if you're a teacher, you have to always judge them favorably. Which is a very interesting vignette that explains the backstory to the teaching of this Mishnah. And dear friends, with that, it's 11:52. That is our first Mishnah, first chapter for today. 3 beautiful teachings. So dear friends, what's the mission for this week? In the next 7 days, until next Friday, number 1, make for yourself a teacher. Let's try to invest in it. Let's try to identify who's going to be that person who I can impose upon myself as an authority, as a mentor, and I'm going to start seeking out their guidance and their advice, and I'm going to follow their advice. Number 2 is to invest, real investment in our friendships. And number 3 is, we always have this, when we're quick to judge, hold ourselves back, hold that judgment and say, before I judge, how can I judge this case favorably? And dear friends, with that we conclude. I want to wish you all a wonderful, good Shabbos, a sweet Shabbos, and we'll see you all next week, God willing, for our study of the next Mishnah in chapter 2. All right, and if you have any questions, of course, we could discuss.
So with regard to the spiritual mentor, that's very clear. With regard to your other friends, do you need to have at least one friend, or can you have like specialists, someone who understands professionally what's going on in your life, someone who understands athletically what's important? So are you okay to have a group of specialist friends, or do you really need to focus on one person?
That's a very good question. When we say make for yourself a rabbi, is it only allowed to be one rabbi? Is it not allowed to be more than one rabbi? So the value definitely is to have one dedicated rabbi. So that you're not starting to go shoplifting. You're shopping around for the right answer that you like. At the same time, you could have different rabbis for different things. Like, for example, when I was dating, I went to not my usual mentor, but I went to somebody else who was my, dedicated for this phase of my life, like as you would call a specialist. And that could also be, you could have a mentor in business, you could have a mentor in your spiritual life, you could have a mentor for another area in your life, for your marriage life or whatever, or, your family life. But the idea is that in that area, in that field of life, it should only be one. And really, the Talmud even sometimes says there's value in having one teacher of Torah. There's value in having multiple teachers of Torah. On the one hand, multiple teachers gives you a much greater variety, and it allows you to, in a certain way, not be stuck to only one model of studies. If you have multiple teachers, you get a much more colorful view of Torah. That's true, but at the end of the day, there has to be one teacher who's ultimately your one teacher of Torah, or else you're going to get confused, or else you're floating, or else you're not grounded. And if you don't have one teacher, you're not going to be growing. It's like a smorgasbord Judaism. Yeah, I hear this, I hear that, and everything sounds good. You need to have one person who's ultimately the one who's teaching you, guiding you, and that is your ultimate authority in Torah study. So I think, to your point, Marshall, you could have different mentors for different areas of life, but in that area, it's one. But friends, of course, there's many friends, of course, good. Yes, Marshall.
So the follow-up of accepting the advice from your spiritual mentor obviously makes a lot of sense, and it's probably for the good. Mm-hmm. Does your spiritual mentor, Rabbi, have an obligation to give you advice in keeping with your own spirituality? For example, might you give different advice to a yeshiva boy than you'd give to someone else who's not as religiously observant?
Oh, 100%.
The ideal would be 100%, but if you give one person the same advice you give another person, is that not genuine?
100%. A real mentor cannot be giving canned pieces of advice. If it's canned piece of advice, first of all, that's a bad mentor. Number 2, Google could do that better than a mentor. You know what I'm saying? If it's just a canned piece of advice, the whole idea is that it's somebody who knows you, can see where you're coming from, can see what you're struggling with, and can give you a piece of advice that's tailor-made for you. Sometimes a piece of advice that's good for you is bad for somebody else. And advice that's good for somebody else is bad for you.
Exactly.
So a good mentor has to be able to take into account, who they're talking to. As the Rebbe would always say, You can never answer questions. You have to answer the questioner. And you see that with the Rebbe. Sometimes exact same question. The Rebbe answered very, very differently to different people. Because the Rebbe was taking into account who's this person, where they're coming from, what's their specific challenge, what's really behind the question. Like, the Rebbe was, I'll give you an example. Just a quick, it was so fascinating. I saw this recently. Two people wrote to the Rebbe asking the exact same problem. They said they're very, very tired. I'm very tired. There were people who were involved. One was a teacher and one was involved in community activism. The teacher said, I'm just so worn out. I feel like I'm losing steam of teaching. And then a community activist said the exact same thing. I'm just getting so tired. I feel like I need a sabbatical. The teacher was a woman, and the Rebbe was so sympathetic to her. And the Rebbe validated her. And the Rebbe said that it seems that you're not teaching the right age. You're a great teacher. Your school doesn't see your strengths. Go to the school, and they're like, tells her exactly what needs to happen. And then the Rebbe says that she's right. She should take 2 months off. 2 months off. She's on overload. So the Rebbe totally validates her, and the Rebbe gives her the answer to her problem. This other community activist, you know what the Rebbe writes to him? The Rebbe says sometimes people get too tired from doing nothing. Sometimes stagnant. What's the word? Stagnatism, whatever. Sometimes not doing things makes you tired. So the Rebbe says, I don't think your tiredness is coming from too much work. I think it's because you're doing too little. And the Rebbe says, if you do more, you would realize you have a lot more energy. So, what's the logic here? In the exact, a month apart, one person, the Rebbe says, you're right, you need a rest. The other person, the Rebbe is totally dismissive and being a little bit tough on them. I think the Rebbe was displaying this idea. A good mentor has to answer the people. Sometimes a person doesn't need a good jolt and say, you know what, I'm sorry, you got to be doing more. Sometimes a person needs the validation and it's legitimate, and you have to say, you know what, yeah, you do need to rest up right now. You need a vacation. You need a honeymoon with your husband. I believe that's what the Rebbe told her. The Rebbe said you have to go without your children and do a special trip just with your husband, which is such a beautiful guidance from the Rebbe to a couple. You're a teacher. You're overworking. You're not dedicating enough time to your family and to your marriage. Invest in your marriage. You have to go on a honeymoon again. But that just shows you how there's no answers cannot be canned. Answers cannot be predictable. Answers have to be really, really personalized and thought through for the situation, for the person, for the circumstances.